The chapel was quiet. Rows of pews lined with dark coats and bowed heads. A few sniffles echoed through the wooden beams, interrupted only by the occasional clearing of a throat. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, just necessary. It was a small gathering. Family. Close friends. A few familiar faces from the neighborhood. And then, her. She stepped through the doors without hesitation. Her steps were careful, deliberate. She didn't look around for permission. She didn't sit in the back. She walked forward, past the mourners on either side, and took a seat 3 rows from the front. No one said her name aloud. But the shift in the room was unmistakable. People turned their heads just slightly, stealing glances. A woman nudged her husband, then looked away as quickly as she had turned. A man at the end of the pew watched her like he was trying to place a memory that hadn't fully settled yet. It had been over 6 years. Since Colorado. Since the house. Since the cameras, the protests, the news trucks outside the courtroom. Since her name flooded every comments section and theory thread across the internet. And just like that, she was back. In plain sight. No disguise. No sunglasses. No effort to hide. She wore black. But not in the way people do when they're trying to blend in. It wasn't a veil of mourning or a shield of modesty. It was just a dress. Clean, pressed. Her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. No makeup that anyone could tell. Just her. As she was. As if this were any other service. The funeral was for a woman in her 60s. A retired nurse. Known for her kindness. Someone who left behind grown children and a small but loving community. Nichol Kessinger's presence made no sense. At least, not at first. But those who knew the family whispered that she had once been close with the daughter. That they had kept in touch, even through the years when Nichol's name was unsearchable on any public record. Even through the time when she was reportedly living under another identity. There were no outbursts. No confrontations. No cameras inside. Just a phone. Held low. Recording without permission. And at the 39-second mark, there she was. In full view. Standing as the minister asked the congregation to rise. Her expression unreadable. Her eyes fixed forward. By the next day, the video had been shared across platforms. Watched. Slowed down. Enhanced. Voices argued over her posture, her walk, the tension in her jaw. But beyond the noise, one fact remained: Nichol Kessinger was no longer in hiding. She hadn't issued a statement. She hadn't run. She attended a funeral and left through the same doors she entered, without once looking behind her. For those who followed the case from the beginning, it reopened every question that had once consumed headlines. And it forced people to ask what they were never prepared to answer. Where had she been? Why now? And most importantly, what did she know? This is where we begin. Her departure from the church was as quiet as her arrival. No commotion. No rush. Just a woman walking out into the overcast light of a cold Montana day. Some followed her with their eyes, but no one moved. The doors closed behind her, and the room seemed to exhale. By nightfall, the clip had gone viral. There was no press release. No law enforcement comment. Nothing official. Just that silent footage. The walk down the aisle. The still frame of her standing beside the pews. The way her fingers interlaced, resting in front of her body like she was trying not to draw attention. But she was the attention. Every corner of the internet that had once poured over her every word had suddenly been given a new frame to dissect. People zoomed in. Paused. Brightened the footage. They debated the height of her heels. The slope of her shoulders. They compared it to surveillance from 2018, police interview footage, court records. And for many, the conclusion was immediate: this wasn't speculation. It was her. Nichol Kessinger had vanished after Chris Watts confessed to murdering his pregnant wife Shanann and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. In the days that followed, her name was everywhere. She had walked into the police department voluntarily. She had told them she had no idea what he was capable of. That she believed he was separating from his wife. That she was as shocked as anyone. But the public didn't believe her. Not all of them. They dissected her words. Her tone. Her silence. They labeled her everything from victim to accomplice. And then, just like that, she was gone. For years, the story stayed alive online. Not because of new evidence. Not because of appeals. But because of what hadn't been said. There were unanswered questions. Gaps in the timeline. Search histories that hinted at curiosity, or guilt, or something else entirely. There were rumors of witness protection. Whispers that she had changed her name and moved out of state. That she had started over, somewhere no one would recognize her. But no one had proof. Until now. The funeral was held at Dull Funeral Chapel in Billings. A modest venue. Wood-paneled walls. Simple decor. It wasn't the kind of place that attracted attention. And maybe that's why she thought she'd be safe there. A place far from Colorado. Far from cameras. Just a private moment for someone she once called a friend. The woman being laid to rest had worked 3 decades at the local hospital. She wasn't famous. She hadn't made headlines. But she had a daughter, someone who had known Nichol before the world did. And that connection, small as it may have seemed, was enough to bring her back to the surface. Some online theorists claim it wasn't just coincidence. That Nichol knew her appearance would spark attention. That she wanted it. That it was timed. Others argue the opposite. That it was grief. Loyalty. An old promise kept. And then there are those who believe something more complex, something more human. That after years of living in the shadows, a moment of remembrance felt worth the risk. In the days that followed, journalists began reaching out to the funeral home. To guests. To the family. Most refused to speak. One anonymous attendee said simply, "It was her. I was 5 feet away." You don't forget a face like that. But no official confirmation ever came. And Nichol, if she ever saw the reaction, never responded. She went back into silence. This wasn't a trial. No court was in session. No subpoenas. No police statements. It was just a funeral. A single day. But it tore open a wound many had spent years trying to close. Because this wasn't just about a woman showing her face. It was about memory. Public memory. And how we choose to remember stories that never felt finished. The Watts case had always left something unresolved. Not legally. Chris was sentenced. Justice, by the letter of the law, was served. But there had always been a sense, unspoken but persistent, that pieces were missing. Conversations unheard. Decisions made in private. And now, seeing Nichol walk through that church aisle, those missing pieces started to float back to the surface. She wasn't arrested. She wasn't charged. But she was remembered. Burned into the collective psyche of a country that watched in horror as a smiling family of 4 became a national tragedy. And for many, she was the shadow that never fully left that picture. Over the next 3 hours, we will explore everything we know about that moment. That funeral. That woman. We will examine the timeline that led her to that chapel. We will listen to the interviews. Revisit the courtrooms. Pull apart the documents line by line. And we will ask the questions that never stop mattering. Because when a name resurfaces after years of silence, it forces us to reconsider what silence ever meant in the first place. This is more than a sighting. This is a reckoning. And it starts, now. August 13, 2018. That was the morning Sean and Watts returned home from a business trip. It was just after 1:48 a.m. when the doorbell camera recorded her stepping onto the porch for the last time. Her suitcase was wheeled behind her. Her sandals clicked gently across the concrete. She would never be seen alive again. Later that day, Chris Watts would call her disappearance confusing. He'd say she was emotional. That they had an emotional conversation before she left with the kids. But the children, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, were never dropped off at school. Sean and missed her doctor's appointment. She didn't answer calls. Friends began to worry. One of them called the police. And the house? It was empty. Too empty. No sounds. No movement. Just silence. In the days that followed, Chris went on television. He begged for their return. He looked into the camera and told America he had no idea what happened. But the cracks came quickly. The neighbor's surveillance footage didn't match his version of the morning. And soon, under pressure, he confessed. He had strangled Shanann. Then loaded her body, along with his daughters, into his work truck. He drove them out to an oil site owned by his employer. He buried his wife in a shallow grave. He smothered his daughters and dropped their small bodies into separate oil tanks. The world recoiled. It wasn't just the brutality. It was the calm with which he described it. The complete emotional absence. The way he told the truth as if it were just another Monday. And then there was Nichol. She met Chris in June of 2018. They worked in the same office. Their flirtation turned quickly into something more. Texts became daily. Lunches turned into nights. She later told police that Chris said he was finalizing a divorce. That his wife was out of the picture. She said she believed him. That she didn't know Shanann was still living in the home. That she didn't know he was still acting like a family man. But the data said otherwise. Search history pulled from her phone showed she had looked up Shanann's name. She had visited her Facebook profile. She had searched, "Can cops trace text messages?" and "How to delete iPhone data permanently." She had Googled, "Man I'm having an affair with says he'll leave his wife." None of it was illegal. But it raised eyebrows. Her interviews with police were long. She spoke calmly, if carefully. She denied any involvement. She said she ended the relationship when she found out what had happened. She called it betrayal. She expressed horror. And then, when the formal questioning ended, she vanished. No more statements. No media appearances. No op-eds. She was gone. There were rumors she had changed her name. That she had moved across the country. That she'd enrolled in school under a different identity. But there were no public photos. No confirmations. No recordings. Until Billings. That one clip, 39 seconds of her standing in a chapel, was all it took to reawaken every doubt. Every memory. Every thread that had gone quiet. It wasn't a crime to attend a funeral. And there's no law against moving on. But something about her presence reopened wounds. Because the truth is, people weren't just haunted by what Chris had done. They were haunted by what they didn't understand. How does a man go from a family vacation to murder in less than a week? How does someone get that close to the fire and walk away untouched? What does a person carry after being tied, forever, to the deadliest kind of betrayal? The story isn't just about bodies. It's about behavior. It's about motives. And it's about silence. In this documentary, we are not here to accuse. We are here to examine. Line by line. Moment by moment. We will go back to Nichol's interviews. We will walk through the data. We will listen to the officers who sat across from her. We will speak with experts who have studied behavior in the aftermath of homicide. And we will ask, again, what was known, and what was chosen. This story has never been about just one day. Or one man. It's about the way trust is broken in layers. The way lies can pass as comfort. And the way people try to rebuild when the foundation is no longer solid. The chapel in Billings was quiet when she left. The guests filed out slowly. Most said nothing. Some wept. One person, holding a program in her hand, looked directly at the camera filming from across the lot and said, "She's here. I don't care what she says. She's here." A funeral, by its nature, is meant to close a chapter. But this one didn't. It opened the door again. We walk through it now. The story doesn't begin at the oil site. It doesn't begin with the police knocking on the front door. It starts earlier, weeks, months before. In text messages. In deleted calls. In quiet moments no one saw. The things that never made the front page, because they didn't scream. They whispered. June 2018. Chris Watts and Nichol Kessinger exchanged phone numbers after a brief conversation at work. She was working in the environmental department. He was a field operator. The initial contact was professional. It didn't stay that way. Within days, the messages changed tone. Chris spoke of being in a broken marriage. He said he was sleeping in the basement. He said they barely spoke. Nichol asked questions. Some of them gentle, some of them direct. She later told investigators she was cautious. That she didn't want to be the other woman. That she believed he was separated. But Shannon's social media told a different story. Happy photos. Family trips. Anniversary posts. Her pregnancy announcement. And it's here that the discomfort begins to settle in. Nichol had searched Shannon's name multiple times. She had looked at her Facebook. She had seen the photos. She told police she didn't confront Chris about them right away. She let the story sit. She let him explain. And he did. He told her they were working out the final steps. That Shannon was controlling. That it was all for show. And she accepted that. Or at least, she told herself she did. They saw each other often. Dates. Sleepovers. Conversations that lasted hours. When Shannon and the girls traveled to North Carolina in the summer, Chris stayed behind. He spent most of that time with Nichol. They hiked. Cooked. Slept beside each other. He told her he loved her. He told her he'd never felt like this before. He talked about starting over. A new life. And then Shannon returned. The texts show a shift. Chris grew distant with Nichol. Less available. She noticed. She asked questions. She started searching online more frequently. Marrying your mistress. Man says he's leaving, wife doesn't. How to recover deleted messages. Can cops read old text messages? The weekend before the murders, Shannon confided in a friend. She said something was off. That Chris was cold. That he wasn't touching her. That he was acting like a stranger. She cried. She wrote notes. She planned to confront him. And then, on the morning of August 13th, she was gone. When Chris was arrested, Nichol went to the police. She agreed to be interviewed. She gave them her phone. She allowed her searches to be documented. She cried. She insisted she didn't know. That she never would have stayed if she had. But the internet didn't believe her. Thousands picked apart every word she said. Every sentence. Every pause. They read into her breathing. Her blinking. They cross-referenced her search history with the timeline of the murders. They pulled apart her statements and measured them against emotion. Against logic. Against grief. And the truth. It's murky. There are gaps. Questions that were never answered under oath. Decisions that made sense only if you trusted her version of events. And millions didn't. When Chris confessed, he gave multiple versions. First, he said Shannon killed the children and he retaliated. Then he said he killed them all himself. Later, in a prison interview, he claimed he told Nichol the truth early on, that he had done something terrible, and she told him to dispose of the evidence. But there is no proof. Just a statement from a man sentenced to life in prison, trying to explain the unexplainable. Nichol has never responded to that claim. For years, her name has remained a ghost in the Watts story. Always there. Always debated. But never confirmed. Until the funeral. She stayed just under 20 minutes. Said nothing. Gave no indication that she knew anyone else present besides the family. One guest remembers her nodding toward the casket. Another recalls seeing her hand tremble as she adjusted her coat. But no one knows what she felt. And that's what haunts people. The silence. The lack of explanation. The disappearance and the return. It plays on something primal, the need to make sense of horror. To assign blame. To close the circle. But in this case, the circle never closed. It just widened. In the months after the murders, Shannon's family spoke often. They grieved publicly. They fought through pain with purpose. They pushed for life imprisonment. They sat through courtrooms. They told their story so the world wouldn't forget. Nichol didn't. She went underground. Changed her name, by some accounts. Moved, by others. Theories circulated that she had protection from law enforcement. Some said she had started over in the Midwest. Others insisted she was in therapy. Writing a book. Living off-grid. But no theory ever carried weight. No photo ever surfaced. No voice confirmed. Until Billings. The video ends as she exits the chapel. Her back is to the camera. Her figure small against the open sky. There are no guards. No crowd. Just a woman walking toward a car, unlocking the door, and sliding inside. The frame goes dark. That single image reopened a cold room of questions. Questions no one could answer. And perhaps, ones no one wanted to. But now, they must be asked again. Every detail, every inconsistency, every silence, examined with fresh eyes. Because when the story comes back to life, you listen. You look closer. And you ask, what don't we know? What have we missed? And why did she return? The video of her leaving the chapel was only 20 seconds long. No zoom, no sound, no clear facial shot. But it was enough. It spread like wildfire, not through mainstream media, but through forums, private groups, subreddits dedicated to unsolved cases and dark psychology. People didn't just want to see her. They wanted to understand her. They analyzed the way she walked. Her posture. The way she turned her head just slightly before opening the car door. They noticed the car itself, a silver sedan, likely rented, plates not local. The driver's side window was down, slightly. A detail that meant nothing to most, but everything to some. Why? Why would someone leave the window cracked at a funeral in midwinter? Was she watching? Listening? Theories revived. Not all were fair. Some were wild, even cruel. But the fact remained, Nichol Kessinger had been a missing puzzle piece in a case that left too many pieces unsolved. Her name wasn't in the court documents as a suspect. Her testimony never appeared at trial. Her face vanished from the public square just as the dust began to settle. But it had never been forgotten. And now, it had returned. The deeper you go into the Chris Watts investigation, the more questions emerge. It wasn't just the crime. It was the precision. The timing. The calm execution of something that defies human instinct. A man murders his wife and 2 children in a span of hours, and then walks out the door to load his work truck like any other morning. He texted his supervisor at 5 a.m. He made small talk with a coworker. He joked about batteries. And in the middle of it all, there was communication between him and Nichol. Records show texts exchanged as early as the evening before the murders. There was nothing overt. No suggestion of violence. No open discussion of plans. But what was missing are the fact that her phone records were wiped days later. That she had used a data recovery app the week of the crime. When interviewed, she stated she deleted messages to protect herself from media harassment. She was afraid of being misunderstood, of being misquoted. But deletion isn't just disappearance. It's intention. And that detail sat with investigators, never enough to charge, but always enough to wonder. FBI analysts later reviewed the interview tapes. One remarked that Nichol showed controlled emotion. Not evasive. Not overtly deceptive. But rehearsed. Calculated. And in cases like this, it's not the lies that speak loudest. It's the omissions. The half-truths. The hesitations that trail just a second too long. Then there were the letters. Chris Watts received hundreds of them in prison. Many from strangers. Some from admirers. But one letter, according to reports from prison staff, was flagged. The name was redacted. The handwriting was familiar. The content vague, but intimate. It referenced forgiveness and truth in time. The letter disappeared from evidence before the media could obtain a copy. And when asked, Chris refused to name the sender. Was it Nichol? No one could say. But the speculation returned with force. And the funeral appearance only fueled it. In Billings, the family of the deceased made no comment. The daughter, rumored to be an old classmate of Nichol's, deactivated her social media. She declined interviews. A neighbor claimed she had seen Nichol months earlier, walking her dog near the edge of town. That same neighbor later retracted her statement. This case, unlike others, never fully allowed closure. Because it wasn't just about what happened. It was about why it happened. And the gaps that remain. Why did Chris kill his family? What triggered the exact moment of violence? What role, if any, did Nichol's presence in his life play? And perhaps most hauntingly, what truths were left unspoken between them? We know that during their relationship, Chris shared deeply personal thoughts with Nichol. He told her he felt trapped. That he was being used for money. That he was only a father on paper. He expressed resentment, loneliness, a yearning for freedom. But he never mentioned rage. Never threats. Nothing to suggest what was coming. And that's why her insight matters. Because if she saw something, if she heard something, that pointed to what he was capable of, and said nothing, then silence becomes weight. There's also the question of control. Chris was calculated. His actions were swift. He confessed only after the evidence cornered him. But the way he described the killings, flat, emotionless, left experts stunned. He claimed he felt nothing as he ended their lives. That he watched their final breaths without resistance. And if that's true, it rewrites everything we thought we understood about motive. Nichol may not have committed a crime. But the proximity to darkness has its own gravity. Being the last person to hold someone's trust before they implode, it leaves marks. We may never know what she saw in him. Or what she told herself in the quiet days after the arrests. But her presence at that church was a ripple. A reminder that stories like these don't end in courtrooms. They echo. Through time. Through people. Through memory. And now, as her name returns to the narrative, so does the burden of unanswered questions. What does she know? Why did she reappear now? And will she ever speak again? We continue.